KoRn with the Serenity of Suffering. This is an album that has a lot riding on the line for it. It's based off of two different things. Firstly, it's based off of what we've heard from the band in regard to this album. Their comments based around it, stating that it's the hardest album that they've done in years, and it definitely is one that has a darker tone to it. But also based around the strength of the three singles that we have received for this disc, which seem to actually, amplify that message, with Insane, Rotting in Vain, and the third single, A Different World, which featured Corey Taylor, all feeling like that they weren't exactly lying to us, that KoRn had returned to perhaps some of those tomes from the late 90s to early 2000s, albums such as Follow the Leader or Issues or maybe even Untouchables. This is a disc that has all that riding on it. So, were they able to deliver? Was it all true, or was some of it just, glorified hype? Well, the first thing that you're going to notice on this album is that those three singles that you heard are within the first 5 songs. Insane and Rotting in Vain start this off, and they give you that certain thickness, that percussive and bass thickness, alongside of heavy guitar that you already know about based off of listening to these singles, and it definitely grants that illusion that KoRn has returned. The songwriting definitely seems to have strengthened a little bit, almost as though the experimentation from the previous couple of albums, from the Age of the, which really is the Totality, and the Paradigm Shift, the two other albums we've gotten in the 2010s from this band, has seemed to wane a little bit, and instead they've returned to sort of that dark place within John and the rest of the band's head in order to really deliver something that has some of that old school charm to it. Now, don't take the term old school charm to mean that there are just a lot of ancient purists out there that just want this to be what KoRn is for all time. It's in reality just this is what they are the most proficient in doing. This is kind of their identity, the thing that they've been able to build. And somewhere, some way, they got a little bit off course. They tried a couple of different things, but it didn't feel like it had the same sense of sort of reality to it, or the same sense of honesty behind it. With these two tracks, and with a lot of the songs on the Serenity of Suffering, that purity and honesty feels like it's very much present once again, almost as though the Wayback Machine also helped them find more than just their core identity, but it also helped them rediscover what it was to write music that felt very much like John was going through all of these tortured emotions, or had lived the lives that have been described. And that's the other thing that's showcased within Black as the Soul. But another weird thing about Black as Your Soul is the fact that if this feels a lot like nu metal Devin Townsend. Nu metal fans, if you don't know who that is, look him up. You're probably going to end up liking him quite a bit, but listen to how you get those bomb, those louder elements to that loudness war idea, those louder, quick little elements. And remember how Devin has been able to function a lot of his different structures, and what has really been one of his strengths within his wall of sound endeavor throughout his own solo works, or even back in the days of Strapping Young Lad. This is something that really makes this a little bit more heavy. It gives it a lot more, tense variety, and also it definitely reinstills that idea of darkness that KoRn stated that they have sort of rediscovered. And that is also proven once again with The Hated, which is a song where John's voice is purposefully wavery right there at the start. And then later on, we hear it once again, establishing it more as a thematic element of this track, as opposed to just, what many people want to call it. Well, John doesn't sound all that good on the beginning of that song. Well, that's kind of the point. He was really going for that sense of more honest, or at least more, real style singing in order to really get that point across. What's funny about it is that after the strength of the first 4 songs, A Different World sounds like a weak point. Although not really a large one. That one's more reserved for Take Me, which is the track that follows it. It just doesn't seem like it has that same power or element to it. It instead feels like it's just a little bit, below average by comparison to the first 5. But wait, before we go even further, there's something I have to say about these first 5 songs. This might be the strongest first 5 whenever it comes to starting a KoRn album since Follow the Leader. It's been that long. These are instantly easy to approach, not to mention they are fantastic tracks within the KoRn discography. It definitely gives you a great sense of what this album is going to be all about. But it also does a second thing that's not quite as good. And that second thing is that it makes the second half of the album really have to shoot for the stars in order to attain just, competence by comparison to the first 5. The last 6 have their work cut out for them. And unfortunately, it doesn't really size up to the task. Now, that's not to say that these last 6 albums are necessarily poor. These are songs that really we've become very accustomed with on KoRn albums. One that do maintain that same level of, thematic significance, but just not feeling quite as strong. KoRn's always been a band that leads with perhaps some of their strongest material, and everything else just feels like it's going to really apply only to certain choice individuals. You're not going to see a track such as Die Yet Another Night or perhaps Next in Line become the new sentimental, fan favorite. It's instead going to be one that might be reserved for Rotting in Vain or even, the Hating. There might be something within there, or, it'll just end up being a different world, and we'll have to find out what Corey Taylor thinks about that. But either way, these are tracks that perhaps on the past few KoRn releases or the latter KoRn releases from the 2000s would have been probably welcome changes. These would have been nice additions and would have felt like they were right on par, or perhaps would have even seemed exemplary by comparison to some of that material. But instead, these feel a little bit lackluster by comparison to the first 5 that you get. And that's not really a bad thing to say. It just says that the momentum was not carried over quite as much. It still has a little bit of charm to it, and it still showcases that KoRn did deliver on the promise that this is a darker album, that this is a heavier album, because the percussion and the bass that you hear is still thick. The guitar work that you get is still that, very thick churn, that chug, chug, chug. John's voice still has that very powerful sort of mid-range behind it, and whenever he wavers from to the upper or the lower tiers, if he does give a bit of a trademark scream, everything feels like it should. It feels real. It has that purity still, that sense that the first 5 were able to give it. It just doesn't feel like the material is quite as strong. However, Next in Line does offer something that's kind of interesting. I like the chorus of this track because it feels like it's sort of draped in 1980s charm a little bit, almost like a 1980s chorus that has been new metalized and given and delivered in 2016, which was a nice second half highlight, at least for me. Not going to talk too much about the 2 deluxe edition bonus cuts. However, these are songs that really I can understand why they're not on the main release, but I can also see why they were released along with the deluxe edition. They are pretty run-of-the-mill. They stand beside the second half of this album very nicely, so they would probably have fit somewhere along those lines. But aside from that, nothing too special to really discuss. Please Come For Me, actually, as a final track, to offer one final note, track 11. I really like this idea, considering it goes back down to that 3-minute range and just uses the power and energy and the darkness, everything that they claim to be building toward in order to deliver a finale that might not necessarily be all of that memorable. However, the one thing you do take away from this is the thickness, is that darkness, is that heaviness, everything that they proved was true on this album that they had claimed. And that's a nice thing to take away from it psychologically. So overall, where does this compare whenever it comes to their albums? Well, first of all, this is certainly the heaviest album since an album such as Issues. This is certainly the heaviest thing that they've done in quite some time. Is it necessarily one of their best? It's probably up there. It's probably within the top 5 of their material. Some might even put it as high as their top 3. That being said, though, the first half certainly shines over the second and still delivers a lot more of your oomph and your ass by comparison. And based around that, the rest of this album's not necessarily bad. It's just sort of suffers by the, just wave of momentum that was delivered beforehand. It just doesn't feel like it sizes up. But that's not a bad thing. These aren't necessarily bad songs. This is not me taking a shit on the second half of the album, because really, the second half of the album is pretty damn good. Really, whenever you take a listen to some of their latter 2000s material, the second half of this disc would cause people to go into a panic and go apeshit. KoRn is back, they would shout. But instead, it's placed on an album where the strength of the songs before it really do damage some of its credence and a little bit of its, viability. Based off of that, this is an album with even that balance. It's still an 85. Yeah, this is an album that actually tops some of those metal records that you love. Sorry guys, gotta be honest. It's a really strong release, and KoRn definitely showcased that they are back, that they do have a lot of that heaviness and darkness still within them. They gave us exactly what they promised. When's the last time you could say that? Now, some people might say, well, KoRn just isn't for me anymore. I'm older now, and that's fine. But if you listen to it from just a pure perspective, it is kind of nice to turn back the clock a little bit. But this doesn't feel like one of those turn back the clock moments. This instead feels like KoRn just merely revisited or refound who it is that they truly are. Because this is who they are. This is what KoRn is. What did you guys think about the Serenity of Suffering? Let me know in the comments below. My name is CoverKillerNation, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.